She smirked when she saw me stand up. That smirk, I'll never forget it. She was absolutely certain she had won. 31 years of my life were in that room, and she thought she could walk out with them in her designer handbag. I walked straight toward her, pulled out a single envelope, and slid it across the table. The room went so quiet I could hear the air conditioning hum. Then I said 4 words. 4 words that made my son go pale and made her hands start shaking. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got to that moment. I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, in a house where the heat came through the walls in July and the pipes froze in January. My father worked the refineries. His father worked the refineries. That was the path laid out for men like us. You showed up, you put in your hours, you came home smelling like crude oil and effort, and you did it again the next morning. I didn't hate that life. I respected it. But I had something in my chest that wouldn't sit still, some restless engine that kept turning over even when I tried to quiet it down. I was 22 years old when I borrowed $4,000 from my Uncle Gerald and bought a used flatbed truck and a set of second-hand welding equipment. I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have a college degree. I had a CDL, a strong back, and the ability to weld a seam so clean it looked machined. I called the business Marsh Fabrication and Metal Works. Just me, that truck, and whatever job I could find. The first year I slept in the truck twice. Not because I was broke. I was broke, but because I was finishing jobs through the night, and it didn't make sense to drive home just to drive back. I took contracts nobody else wanted. Repair work on agricultural equipment out in the county. Custom railings for a man building a hunting lodge. Structural supports for a gas station canopy and Vidor that had been hit by a truck. Small work. Unglamorous work. The kind of work where nobody says thank you, they just call you again when something else breaks. By the time my son Marcus was born, I had 4 employees and a leased shop space out on Industrial Boulevard. His mother, my wife Carol, used to bring him to the shop on Saturday mornings when he was still in diapers. She'd set him on the concrete floor on a blanket, and he'd watch the sparks from the plasma cutter with his eyes wide open, completely unafraid. I used to joke that he had metal in his blood. Carol passed when Marcus was 14. Cancer. The kind that comes fast and doesn't negotiate. One spring she was healthy. By fall she was gone. Those 2 years in between were the hardest of my life. Harder than any lean business year, harder than any difficult customer or broken contract. I kept the shop running. I had to. We had 11 employees by then, and I wasn't going to let their families suffer because mine was falling apart. Marcus understood more than I gave him credit for. He was quiet after his mother died, but he was steady. He started coming to the shop on weekday afternoons, doing homework at my desk, learning the names of the equipment, asking questions. He was a smart kid. Genuinely sharp. Not just book smart either, he could look at a fabrication problem and see the solution before I'd finished explaining it. I was proud of him in the way that makes your chest ache a little. When he got accepted to Texas A&M on a partial scholarship, I told him to take it without hesitation. I covered the rest. He was the first person in my family to go to college for engineering. The day he got his degree, I stood in that auditorium and thought about my father at the refinery and my grandfather before him, and I felt something shift in my understanding of what our family was capable of. He came back to Beaumont after graduation. I offered him a position as a junior project manager, same starting point as anyone else I'd hired. He didn't argue. He showed up on Monday morning in work boots and did the job. I watched him learn the operation from the ground up, just like I had, just like I'd always hoped he would. Those were good years. We'd go to breakfast at the diner on Calder Avenue before the shop opened, talk through the week's jobs, argue about approach. He'd push for newer equipment, and I'd push back about cash flow. We were a good team. I thought we understood each other. He met Renata at an industry conference in Houston. She was a consultant corporate restructuring, she called it, which I later came to understand meant she helped companies shed the parts of themselves that weren't profitable, regardless of the people attached to those parts. She was 34, polished in a way that made Beaumont feel small, with a confidence that filled rooms before she opened her mouth. Marcus brought her to Sunday dinner about 3 months after they met. I was polite. I asked her questions about her work. She answered with a kind of patience that I recognized later as condescension, the patience you use with someone you've already decided doesn't quite understand the world the way you do. They married the following spring. I gave Marcus a 20% ownership stake in Marsh Fabrication as a wedding gift. I'd been planning to give it to him eventually regardless, and the timing felt right. He was 29. He'd been working in the business for 4 years. He knew the operation. The other 80% remained mine. I want you to understand that clearly, because it becomes important. Renata came into the business about 8 months after the wedding. She'd left her consulting firm or was pushed out. I never got the full story, and Marcus suggested she could help with the administrative side of things. Billing, vendor contracts, client communications. I agreed. I should have trusted the small voice in the back of my mind that told me to keep it limited and documented. I didn't. She was my daughter-in-law. I extended her the same trust I extended family. The changes started small. She reorganized the billing system, which she said was outdated, and she wasn't entirely wrong. She renegotiated 2 vendor contracts, saved us a few $1,000s annually. I acknowledged those contributions. But then the scope started expanding. She began sitting in on client meetings without being invited. She started CCing herself on correspondence between me and our largest accounts. She introduced herself at a contractor luncheon as the company's Director of Strategic Development, a title I had never given her, and that didn't exist. I brought it up with Marcus over breakfast. He told me she was just trying to help, that she had ideas about growing the company that were worth hearing. I said I was happy to hear ideas, that what I was less happy about was her redefining her role without talking to me first. He got quiet the way he used to get quiet as a teenager when he didn't want to fight but didn't agree with me either. We finished our coffee and went to work and didn't resolve it. Over the next several months, I started noticing things. Conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. Emails I should have been copied on that I wasn't. Renata began meeting one-on-one with our operations manager, Dale, a man who'd been with me for 16 years. I asked Dale about it directly. He looked uncomfortable and said she'd been asking questions about how things had been done in the past, whether there was appetite among the staff for changes in leadership structure. I thanked him for telling me and didn't let my face show what I was feeling. What I was feeling was the ground shifting under my feet. Not dramatically, not all at once, the way it shifts in an earthquake. More like the slow, subtle subsidence you get in this part of Texas, where the earth just gradually decides it's done supporting what's sitting on top of it. I started paying closer attention. I hired a business attorney in Houston named Patricia Okafor, someone Renata didn't know and had no connection to. I asked Patricia to review every document, every contract, every ownership agreement connected to the business. I had her explain to me in plain language exactly what my 20% gift to Marcus meant, exactly what rights it conveyed, exactly what it would take for anyone to force any kind of restructuring. Then I made some very quiet, very deliberate moves. I won't detail all of them here. What matters is that when the conversation finally happened, I was not walking in blind. The conversation happened on a Thursday evening in October. Marcus called and asked me to come to their house for dinner. Said he and Renata wanted to talk through some things about the company. I said I'd be there at 6. Their house was nice. Marcus had done well. Good neighborhood, well-maintained yard, the kind of house you feel the effort of in every detail. Renata had cooked, which she didn't usually do, and there was a bottle of wine on the table that I recognized as expensive. I noticed she'd also laid out folders. 3 of them, sitting at the end of the table, like they were waiting to be called upon. We ate. We made conversation. Marcus was tense in a way he was trying to hide and not quite succeeding. Renata was composed, almost performatively calm, the way people get when they've rehearsed a conversation many times and feel ready for it. After dinner, she placed her hand on one of the folders and told me they wanted to talk about the future of the company. I said I was always interested in talking about the future of the company. She said she'd been doing a strategic analysis, and she believed the business was being held back by its current structure. That the market had evolved and the company hadn't kept pace. That with the right restructuring, they could double revenue within 3 years. I asked her what she meant by restructuring. She opened the first folder. Inside was a proposal formatted, printed, professional, outlining a new corporate structure in which the company would be split into two operating entities. One would handle the legacy fabrication work, the contracts and clients I'd built over 30 years. The other would be a new entity focused on what she called growth verticals, expanded into prefabricated structural components, municipal contracts, larger commercial projects. On paper, the split looked even. In practice, the legacy entity, my entity, would carry the existing debt, the existing equipment maintenance obligations, and the majority of our long-term vendor commitments. The new entity would get the cleanest balance sheet, the best equipment, and the most promising new client relationships that Marcus and Renata had been quietly cultivating on the side. The new entity would be managed by Renata as majority stakeholder. I sat with that for a moment. I looked at my son. He was looking at the table. I asked Marcus directly if this was what he wanted. He said he thought it was the best path forward. He said he knew it was a lot to take in. He said he hoped I would see that he wasn't trying to take anything from me. He was trying to build something new. I asked him if he'd looked at the debt allocation in the proposal. There was a pause. He said Renata had handled the financial modeling. I looked at Renata. She was watching me with that composed, patient expression, and underneath it, if you knew what to look for, there was something else. Satisfaction, I think. The satisfaction of someone who believes the outcome is already decided. I told them I needed a few days to review the documents. Renata said they'd appreciate a decision within the week, that there were timing considerations related to some of the new contracts. I picked up the folder, thanked her for the meal, told my son I loved him, and drove home. I called Patricia Okafor that night. She'd already reviewed everything I needed her to review. I told her to proceed. What Renata's proposal relied on what she had apparently not researched carefully enough, or perhaps had assumed didn't apply, was a clause in the original business formation documents that required unanimous agreement among all ownership stakeholders before any structural division of company assets could be executed. I held 80%. Marcus held 20%. Without my agreement, the split couldn't happen. She could propose it. She could pressure me toward it, but she could not force it. What she also hadn't researched was the timeline of certain vendor relationships. One of our largest suppliers, a steel distribution company we'd worked with for 11 years, had a contract with a loyalty clause. If we restructured or sold, they had 30 days to renegotiate terms or exit. Renata's plan counted on those supply relationships, transferring cleanly to the new entity. Without them, the growth verticals she'd outlined were short on materials at the margins she'd projected. And there was one more thing. The most important thing. About a month before that Thursday dinner, I had quietly moved to refinance and consolidate the company's outstanding debt under a new instrument that my attorney had structured carefully. The result was that the majority of our balance sheet obligations, the ones Renata's proposal had planned to assign to my entity, were now attached to the specific equipment lines and operational contracts that she had proposed putting into her new entity. She'd designed her proposal to strand me with the debt. But by the time she sat down at that table with her folders, the debt had moved. She didn't know that yet. The following Tuesday, I called a meeting at the shop. Conference room, 9 in the morning. I asked that Marcus and Renata both attend, along with Dale, our lead project manager Sandra, and our accountant Jim. Not a full staff meeting, just the people whose work would be most affected by any structural change, and whose respect I had earned over years of working alongside them. Renata walked in looking prepared. She had her own folder. She'd probably expected some version of this, a counter-negotiation, an attempt to adjust terms. She sat down at the table with the quiet confidence of someone who believes the important work has already been done. I let everyone get settled. I thanked them for coming in. Then I pushed my own folder across the table to Renata. I told her that I had reviewed her proposal carefully, that I appreciated the effort she'd put into the presentation, and that I was prepared to give her exactly what she'd asked for. She didn't show much, just a small shift, a slight straightening of posture. I told her that I was prepared to execute a company division, that I would deed to her the new entity she had proposed, the growth-focused one, the one she'd designed to be the future of the business. I would keep the legacy operation. All she had to do was sign the transfer documents my attorney had prepared. She opened the folder. She started reading. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the ventilation system and the distant sound of the shop floor 2 doors down. Her face didn't change at first. She was trained for composure, but her eyes moved faster across the lines of text as she kept reading, and I watched her hands still on the pages. The entity she was receiving had the new equipment that was financed. She was receiving the financing obligation along with it. The new client contracts she'd been cultivating were there, but 2 of the largest were with municipal agencies that had 30-day review periods upon ownership transfer, meaning no revenue for 30 days minimum, while the obligations started immediately. And the debt consolidation my attorney had structured meant that the operational funding lines she'd planned to draw from were tied to the performance of the very contracts that were now in review. On paper, she had gotten exactly what she asked for. In practice, she had inherited a beautifully constructed obligation. She looked up at me. I said 4 words. I said, "Congratulations on your company." The silence was the kind I haven't heard in a conference room before or since. Dale was looking at the table. Sandra was looking at me. Jim already knew, because he'd helped me structure it. Marcus was looking at his wife. Renata's composure held for about 10 seconds. Then she asked me, very quietly, what I had done. I told her I had accepted her proposal. She said that was not what she had proposed. I told her that the entity structure was identical to her document. I asked her if she'd like to compare them side by side. Marcus spoke up. He asked me if I understood what this would do to their finances. I told him I understood it very well. I told him I had understood the proposal she'd brought to the dinner table very well too. I asked him if he had understood it when he sat across from me and told me she'd handled the financial modeling. He didn't answer that. Renata pushed back from the table. She told me this wasn't over. She said she would talk to her attorneys. I told her that would be a good idea. She left. I heard the front door of the shop close behind her. The 5 of us left in that conference room sat in quiet for a moment. Then Jim made a sound that was almost a laugh and turned it into a cough. Sandra looked at her hands. Dale looked at me. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I didn't enjoy that moment the way some people might expect me to. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was tired and sad and determined. 31 years of work. A son I had loved since before he could speak. A business that had carried our family through grief and difficulty and all the ordinary burdens of a life. I hadn't wanted any of this. I had wanted breakfast at the diner and arguments about equipment budgets and the sound of the shop floor in the morning. But I had built this business from $4,000 borrowed dollars and a second-hand welder, and I had not built it to hand it to someone who saw it as an acquisition rather than a life's work. Marcus came to see me at home that Friday evening. He sat in the kitchen the way he used to sit when he was a teenager and had something hard to say. He looked older than he had in the conference room. Older than he had in a long time. He told me that Renata's attorneys had looked at the documents and confirmed there was no structural basis to challenge the transfer. He told me she was going to take some time to try to stabilize the new entity, but that the financing situation was difficult. He didn't use the word she'd used in the conference room, but from what he described, I understood she was facing at least 18 months of very tight operational margins, assuming the municipal contracts renewed cleanly. Then he was quiet for a while. He stared at the kitchen table. He said, "Dad, did you know from the beginning?" I told him not from the very beginning. From the beginning I had trusted both of them. Then I started paying attention. He nodded slowly. He told me he was sorry. He said it plainly, without explaining it too much or qualifying it. Just, "I'm sorry, Dad." I told him I knew. I told him I wasn't interested in holding it against him. He asked me if there was any path back. Back to the company. Back to what we'd had. He said he knew he'd have to earn it. He said he wasn't asking for his stake back, wasn't asking for anything, he just wanted to know if the door was open. I looked at my son across the kitchen table. I thought about him at 14, steady and quiet in the worst year of our lives. I thought about him at 22 in work boots on his first Monday morning. I thought about him in the auditorium at College Station and the way my chest had ached with something that didn't have a clean name. I told him the door was always open. I told him if he wanted to come back and start over same as anyone, ground floor, earning it back, I would welcome that. He nodded again and pressed his lips together and looked away for a second. He came back to the shop the following month. Not as an owner, not as a manager. He came in as a fabricator's assistant, learning the floor work he had mostly observed from offices and conference rooms. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for special treatment. He showed up early and stayed late and asked questions from a place of genuine wanting to know, rather than already thinking he knew. I won't pretend the first few months were easy. There were days the air between us was heavy with everything unspoken. There were mornings at the diner that were more quiet than they used to be. But there is something about shared work, real work, the kind where your hands get involved, that has a way of clearing the air that conversation can't always manage. One morning in February, about 4 months after he'd come back, we were both in the shop early. He was running a bead on a structural support piece, and I watched him from across the floor for a moment without him knowing I was there. His technique was good. Better than it had been when he was in his 20s, more patient. He had the welder's stillness, that quality of absolute focus that you either have or you don't, and I could see in the way he held himself that he had found it. I walked over and told him the bead looked clean. He turned off the welder and pushed up his mask. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized because I'd seen it in the mirror at various points in my own life, the expression of a man who has been through something hard and come out the other side of it with a clearer understanding of what he values. He said, "I learned from the right person. I don't have any grand conclusion to offer you about what all of this means. I'm 63 years old and I've been in business for over 4 decades, and I still don't have a clean theory of how families and work are supposed to coexist. What I know is this. What you build over a lifetime holds the shape of your hands. Someone who didn't build it will never feel that shape the way you do, and if you let them forget that, if you let anyone forget that, they will make decisions about your life's work that they have not earned the right to make. I also know that a person can get lost and find their way back. I know that because I watched it happen across a welding table on a Tuesday morning in February, and it was one of the better things I have seen in my 63 years. The shop is still on Industrial Boulevard. We have 24 employees now, the most we've ever had. Marcus runs the floor operations. I handle client relationships and keep an eye on the books. We still have breakfast at the diner on Calder Avenue on Monday mornings before the week starts. The coffee there isn't anything special, but I've never had a cup I looked forward to more. What you build with your own hands carries something that can't be transferred on paper. It holds the memory of every early morning, every hard decision, every time you showed up when it would have been easier not to. Robert didn't win because he was clever. He won because he never stopped paying attention, and because when his son came back with nothing but an apology and a willingness to start over, he left the door open. That open door mattered more than any legal document ever could. A small note to our viewers. This story was crafted and imagined by AI, created to entertain you and hopefully leave you with something warm to carry into your day.